On December 15, 1900, a lighthouse meant to save lives stood perfectly intact, and the 3 men assigned to it were gone. No bodies, no struggle, just silence. I want you to imagine this the way I imagine it every time I read the reports. Gray Atlantic waves heaving under a low winter sky, wind screaming like something alive, and then, rising from the rock, a lighthouse that should have been glowing, but wasn't. I'm telling this in the first person because that's how it feels when you go deep enough into this case. It stops being history and starts feeling personal, like the sea is whispering directly to you. The Flannan Isles sit far off the northwest coast of Scotland, a scatter of dark volcanic rocks that most sailors only ever saw as shapes in fog. No trees, no villages, no shelter, just cliffs, seabirds, and the Atlantic Ocean hammering the stone day and night. On the largest island, Island Moor, stood the lighthouse. It was new back then, modern for its time, and absolutely vital. Ships relied on it to survive those waters. 3 men were stationed there. Thomas Marshall, the senior keeper, James Ducat, experienced and steady, and Donald MacArthur, a strong worker with a reputation for being a little volatile, a little unpredictable. They rotated shifts, kept logs, cleaned lenses, and waited weeks at a time for relief. Isolation wasn't a side effect of the job. It was the job. By mid-December, the relief ship Hesperus was due to check on them. Bad weather delayed the voyage, which wasn't unusual. Storms ruled that sea. But as days passed, something strange began to register. Ships passing the Flannan Isles reported the lighthouse dark. No beam cutting through the fog. No reassuring flash. At first, captains assumed equipment failure or poor visibility, but the reports kept coming. When the Hesperus finally approached Island Moor, the crew felt it before they even set foot on land. Sailors later said there was something wrong with the silence. No smoke from the chimney, no figures waiting by the landing platform, no signal flag, just waves smashing against rock, and a lighthouse that looked abandoned. Joseph Moore, one of the relief keepers, volunteered to go ashore. As he climbed the steep steps carved into the cliff, he expected to hear footsteps or shouting, or at least the creak of the door opening. Nothing. He reached the gate. It was locked. That alone didn't make sense. He unlocked it and stepped inside. The lighthouse yard was empty. No sign of a struggle. No damage. Everything looked maintained. Too maintained. Inside the main building, the beds were unmade, as if the men had risen suddenly and never returned. Oilskins were missing. One coat was left behind, which was strange in December, in that wind, on those rocks. Then Moore entered the kitchen. A meal sat on the table, plates laid out, food uneaten, chairs slightly pushed back, like the men had stood up mid-bite. The clock had stopped. The lamps were cleaned, filled, and ready, but unlit, and the logbook lay open, its final entries neat and careful. The last recorded note mentioned severe weather, strong winds, heavy seas, and then nothing. No farewell, no explanation. Moore later said he felt watched inside that lighthouse. He shouted the men's names into the wind until his voice broke. Only the sea answered. The Hesperus fired a signal gun. The echo rolled across the cliffs and vanished into fog. No one came. Search parties scoured the island. They found damage on the western side. Railings twisted and torn away. A supply box smashed. Stones displaced as if something unimaginably powerful had struck the rock face. It looked like the sea itself had climbed the cliff and reached out. But here's the problem. To reach that height, the waves would have needed to be monstrous, possible, but rare. And even if a wave had swept one man away, why all 3? Why at different locations? Why leave a coat behind? The theories began almost immediately. Some said one man was swept into the sea and the others rushed to save him, only to be taken as well. A tragic chain reaction. It sounds reasonable until you consider lighthouse protocol. Keepers were trained never to leave their posts unattended, especially in storms. And yet the light was dark. Others whispered darker ideas. A fight, a breakdown. MacArthur had a temper, they said. Maybe he snapped. Maybe the others tried to restrain him. Maybe they all went over the edge. But again, no blood, no signs of violence, no bodies washed ashore. Then came the stories that refused to die. Sailors claimed to hear voices near the island on foggy nights. Others swore the lighthouse beam flickered on years after it was automated, as if someone were still climbing the stairs, still tending the light. There were even rumors of a massive black shape rising from the water during storms, something older than ships, something that didn't care about men or rules or reason. Official investigations leaned toward a rogue wave, a freak event, 1 in a million, powerful enough to smash iron railings and erase 3 men without leaving a trace. It's the explanation written into textbooks, the safe explanation. But safe explanations don't explain the meal. They don't explain the locked gate. They don't explain the sense that the men left suddenly, urgently, as if called outside by something they couldn't ignore. I keep thinking about the isolation. Weeks without another human voice. Endless wind, endless sea. The mind starts to bend under that pressure. Lighthouse keepers in that era wrote about hearing footsteps when alone, about seeing movement where there was none, about feeling the presence of something just beyond the door. What if the storm wasn't the first thing that went wrong? What if, by the time the sea rose, the men were already unraveling? Or worse, what if something came to the island before the storm? The Flannan Isles were avoided long before the lighthouse was built. Old Gaelic tales warned against staying there overnight. Fishermen spoke of spirits, of the dead walking in mist, of voices that mimicked the living. Those stories were dismissed as superstition, but superstition has a way of surviving where facts fail. Even today, the mystery refuses to settle. The lighthouse still stands, automated now, cold and mechanical. But visitors report an unease they can't explain, a heaviness, a sense of being observed. Some refuse to stay after sunset. 3 men went missing on Island Moor. No graves, no answers, just a lighthouse that kept its secrets, and a sea that never gave anything back. Maybe it was a wave, maybe it was fear, or maybe on that winter night, something answered a call that should never have been made, and whatever it was, it made sure the light went out first. Before we continue, if you're enjoying the story, don't forget to like, subscribe, and share it with your friends. And tell us in the comments, where are you watching from? I'm putting this on record because staying silent no longer feels like an option. What happened to my father? What happened at that lighthouse? And what still seems to be happening years later? If I don't document it properly, it will disappear into rumor, dismissed as another sea story told by people who've never stood alone at the edge of the world. My father was a lighthouse operator. That's what the official paperwork says. Coastal Sector L17, North Atlantic Edge, a place most people only see as a dot on a maritime chart. From 1996 until 2008, that lighthouse was his responsibility. At the time, I was 14. Old enough to notice the changes in him, young enough not to understand what they meant. People always described the job as lonely. My father never corrected them. He'd just nod and say, "It's quiet out there." But after a while, his definition of quiet didn't match mine. Quiet, to him, wasn't peaceful. It was heavy, like something pressing down on your ears and your thoughts at the same time. The lighthouse itself sat on a jagged stretch of rock, accessible only by boat, sometimes helicopter if the weather allowed it. According to maintenance logs, it was considered structurally sound. According to my father's personal notes, which I only found years later, it was anything but normal. The first log entry that stood out was dated November 3, 2001. Official report, light functioning, weather calm, no incidents. But in the margins, written in his handwriting, was a single line he never mentioned to us. The fog came in before sunset. That's not supposed to happen. At the time, I didn't know enough about maritime conditions to understand why that mattered. Now, I do. Fog in that region followed patterns, predictable ones. What he was describing wasn't fog rolling in. It was fog appearing, thick and sudden, as if the sea itself had exhaled. A month later, he called home during one of his rotations. His voice sounded off, not scared, not panicked, just cautious, like someone choosing every word carefully. He asked me if I'd ever heard footsteps in an empty house and felt sure someone was there anyway. I laughed. He didn't. He told me sometimes, late at night, when the light was rotating and the generator hummed just loud enough to blend into the wind, he heard movement below the tower. Slow footsteps, pauses, then more footsteps, always stopping when he checked. I asked him if he thought someone was trespassing. He said no. People don't walk like that, he told me. Not out here. The official station reports from that winter show an increase in maintenance checks, extra inspections of the lower levels, requests for replacement bulbs that didn't align with standard burn time. Small things, easy to overlook unless you're actively looking for a pattern. The pattern was this. Every time my father reported unusual sounds or visual disturbances in his private notes, something mechanical would fail shortly after. Lights dimming, power fluctuations. Once the rotation stopped for exactly 90 seconds, then resumed on its own. No explanation was ever found. In February 2004, a supply boat arrived late due to rough seas. The crew later testified that when they approached the lighthouse, the beam was active but erratic. Not broken, not malfunctioning, just hesitating, like it was pausing between rotations. They joked about it at the time. Sailors always do. My father didn't. That night, he wrote 6 pages in his notebook. I know because the notebook jumps from page 42 to page 49. The missing pages were torn out. I never found them. The last intact sentence reads, "It knows when I'm watching." After that, his behavior changed in ways that didn't make sense unless you'd read those notes. He stopped standing near windows. He taped over reflective surfaces. He insisted that when we spoke on the phone, we keep the conversation short. "Sound carries strangely out here," he said, "especially names." In 2007, automation plans were announced. The lighthouse would be converted within a year. No more keepers. My mother was relieved. I remember her saying, "Finally, you'll be done with that place." My father didn't respond. 3 weeks before his final scheduled rotation, he sent an email from the station's terminal. It wasn't addressed to anyone. It read like a report, but it was never filed. The light doesn't just warn ships away from land. It marks something. I think it always has. The last time I spoke to him was during a storm. Not a major one. Nothing that would make headlines. Just heavy wind, rough seas. He sounded tired, older than he should have. He told me that sometimes when the fog was thick enough, he could see shapes moving inside the beam. Not shadows, not birds. "Whatever's out there," he said, "it doesn't like the dark." The following morning, the lighthouse failed to respond to routine check-ins. A boat was dispatched when the weather cleared. The report says the door was locked from the inside. The light was still on. My father was gone. No signs of a struggle. No damaged equipment. No footprints outside, despite the damp conditions. His personal belongings were neatly arranged. His notebook was open on the desk. The final entry was time-stamped 2:17 a.m. It's closer now. If anyone reads this, don't turn the light off. The official conclusion was accident at sea. That's what they always use when there's no body. But here's the part they never put in the reports. 2 weeks after the lighthouse was fully automated, a technician filed a complaint. He claimed that during overnight calibration, the interior lights activated on their own. Not the main beam, the internal stairwell lights, one by one, from the bottom up. The complaint was dismissed as fatigue. I obtained the maintenance logs last year, cross-referenced them with weather reports, fog density, wave height. Every unexplained anomaly aligns with nights when the beam remained active longer than scheduled. I don't live near the coast anymore, but sometimes late at night, when I'm half asleep, I see light moving across my walls, slow, circular, like it's searching. And every time that happens, I remember my father's last warning. The light isn't there to guide you home. It's there to keep something away. And I'm not sure what happens when no one's left to watch it. If this story gave you chills, don't forget to like, subscribe, and share it with your friends. And tell us in the comments which part scared you the most and drop your ideas in the comments. Your idea might be our next nightmare.